On December 4th, former mayor and current national embarrassment Rudy Giuliani held a hearing about voter fraud at the Michigan State Capitol. Michigan is one of several states that Donald Trump has targeted with claims of widespread voter fraud, and others include Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. The purported evidence includes affidavits signed by alleged witnesses to even more alleged voter fraud and disputes over voting machines and Sharpies, of all things. So far, the courts have thrown out all of these cases, and there isn't substantial evidence of fraud, not on a scale that would warrant a recount or a new election or the election of Donald Trump. Yet, the hearing in Lansing took place, and I watched quite a bit of it, and it was...
Do you even know the answer to that?
No, I guess I'm trying to get to the bottom
Zero.
of this here.
Zero. There's zero.
So, my question then is if the...
Guess how many, wait, what about the turnout rate? 120%?
Let's let Representative Johnson ask his question, please.
But that's not what I want to talk about today. Not only because it makes me extremely anxious to feel like I'm living in an entirely different world than the 70% of Republican voters who believe that election fraud took place, but because I also think I have a message that can appeal to anyone on either side of this issue. And that is that none of this would be happening if we had a national popular vote. When I say national popular vote, I mean a national popular vote for the President of the United States. Now, I'm an anarchist, and that means I believe in a stateless, classless, moneyless society, so I'm not super sure on the whole president thing in the first place, but you gotta work with what you got and plan the revolution in the meantime. National popular vote would mean that the president is elected based on who gets the most votes in the country. And it's so simple that it's basically what we teach a lot of younger kids in school. We say, the first Tuesday of November, everybody casts a ballot, and whoever gets the most votes becomes the next president, and everyone's vote counts and matters equally. But unfortunately, like so much of what we teach our young students in elementary school and their early civics and government education, this is a lie. Not everyone's vote is equal, and over 10% of American presidents took the office after losing the popular vote, meaning that they did not have the majority support of voters in this country because of the Electoral College. I remember learning about the Electoral College for the first time in high school, and I'm sure that we talked about it before. It's very possible, and I just forgot about it or wasn't paying attention. And when I taught 8th grade social studies, I definitely talked about the Electoral College. I informed my students about it, but it wouldn't surprise me if it took until 9th or 10th grade for me to be taught it directly. And I don't blame teachers for doing this. I'm a teacher myself, and the Electoral College is really complicated. So let's just start with what happens on an American ballot. My ballot this year in Michigan looked like this. And under the president, you can see the candidates listed: Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and do you see what this says? Electors of President and Vice President of the United States. So what does this mean? It means that when I cast my vote for my candidate of choice, I'm not actually electing that candidate. I am not casting my vote for that candidate. I am electing someone else to vote for the president for me. And these are people that we call electors. So on my ballot, I'm voting for an elector in my congressional district and 2 at-large electors. They are people who support my candidate or party of choice, so I'm pretty confident that they will vote for them when the time comes, but more on that later. So who are these electors? It was actually really hard for me to find out who my electors are, and I'm pretty Google savvy. Their names don't appear anywhere on my ballot. They don't appear anywhere in campaign ads. They don't appear on yard signs. They don't have a website. I had to find out about them in an article from the Detroit Free Press. And a sidebar here, I have a shout out to Clara Hendrickson and Nishrat Rahman of Freep of Detroit Free Press, who asked the Michigan electors that they were able to contact whether or not they believed that the Electoral College should be abolished. And most of them said yes. Only 4 of them, that's 25% of them said no or were kind of lukewarm about it. And I also got the impression that some of them felt like their anti-electoral college sentiments were out of the norm or strange in some way. And that's exactly why I'm making this video, because this is a popular idea. Most people want to get rid of the Electoral College. Anyway, that's who I actually voted for when I cast my ballot for Joe Biden. I know. I didn't actually vote for him. I voted for those practically anonymous electors who will vote for him on my behalf at the Electoral College convention. So, how are electors chosen? This could be its own video. It's super confusing to me, and I need to do more research on it myself. But I think a brief-ish summary on how electors are chosen in the first place is important. So I'm just going to talk about the Michigan system, because that's what I'm familiar with, and I don't know what the heck a caucus is. So way back in March, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the Michigan primary. And in my state, you don't have to be a registered member of a party in order to vote in the primaries. I could have voted in the Republican primary if I wanted to, but I could only select one party to vote for. I can't cast a primary ballot for Republicans and then cast another ballot for Democrats later. They don't allow that. And just like my vote in November, my vote didn't actually go toward my candidate. It didn't go to Bernie Sanders. It went to Sanders delegates, who would then go to the big Democrat National Convention, or DNC, as you've heard it called, and they would then support Sanders. And the winner then at the DNC determines which electors are chosen for the general election in November. And they're typically donors or volunteers or other active party members who will definitely toe the line for the party. Delegates of candidates who dropped out, like Harris delegates and Warren delegates and the hundreds of other Democrat nominees that were out there, those delegates are then meted out to the other candidates' electors, and only candidates who receive more than 15% of the votes are viable. And there are also super delegates whose votes are worth like super or something. And have you seen this formula? What the heck is this? The whole thing is difficult to understand on purpose to consolidate power into fewer hands, just like the National Electoral College. There are 538 electoral votes up for grabs in each presidential election year, which is why statistics clown Nate Silver's website is named what it is. The Electoral College is enshrined in our Constitution, and this is from Article 2, Section 1, Clauses 2 and 3 of the Constitution. Each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed as an elector. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. So what that means is that each state is allocated a certain amount of electoral votes, which is based on the population count during the census, which is part of why the census is so important. I hope that you answered the census this year. This number is equal, as it says in these clauses, to the number of representatives and senators each state has, which means each state gets at least 3. That's 1 representative and 2 senators minimum. So there are 435 representatives in the United States and 100 senators, so wait a minute, that only adds up to 535. Yeah, that's because the District of Columbia also gets 3 electoral votes just for their 1 district. But they don't get representation in Congress, so I guess it's even. Look, none of it makes sense. None of this makes any sense when you actually look into it.
This is beans inside.
What this system ends up doing is, yes, apportioning more electoral votes to more populous states, which makes sense, kind of, but it also makes it so that votes in certain states have more power than votes in other states. In every state except for Nebraska and Maine, the candidate who wins the state popular vote wins all of the electoral votes. Nebraska and Maine base their electors on who wins each elector's district instead. And then the two at-large electors go to the person who won the overall popular vote there. That means that their electoral votes could be split between candidates. So that's a little bit more fair. But for every other state, what this system ends up doing is allowing a president to win a majority of electoral votes, and you need 270 to secure the presidency, but not necessarily win the popular vote. Like I said before, 10% of American presidents have won this way. And I am probably doing my math wrong there. Five presidents have won the presidency without winning the national popular vote. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won over 2.8 million more votes than Donald Trump did. And we know how that election went. This happens because of the imbalance of electoral votes compared to state population. So let's play a little game of pretend. Let's pretend that 100% of voters in Hawaii elected Biden. They voted for Biden in 2020. Let's pretend that all of them, literally all of the people who voted in 2020 in Hawaii voted for Biden. And that's 574,469 votes based on the count that I could find. So with all of those votes, Biden still would have gotten 4 electoral votes because that's how much Hawaii has to offer. Then let's say that all 276,765 voters in Wyoming voted for Trump. That's only 48% as many votes as in Hawaii, but Wyoming would grant 3 electoral votes for Trump. That's 75% of what Hawaii has to offer. So you can already start seeing the imbalance here. Let's add Vermont in there and say that 100% of their voters voted for Trump, adding 367,428 votes for Trump to the popular vote and 3 more electoral votes. And you add that to Wyoming's other 3 votes and you get a total national popular vote between Wyoming and Vermont of 644,193, which is more than Hawaii. But only a little over 10% more. And this is where you really see that imbalance. Even though it's only 10% more votes, with literally everyone in both Wyoming and Vermont voting for Trump, he still gets 6 electoral votes from those 2 states compared to Hawaii's 4. That's 2/3 more. And I know that's a really exaggerated version of events that would never happen. I mean, Vermonters would not vote for Trump. That's Bernie Sanders territory. But it illustrates my point, and you can see it play out on an even bigger scale. Take 2016, for example. Hillary Clinton won 65,853,514 votes, and Donald Trump won 62,984,828 votes. So doing a little math, that's like 96-ish%, and I'm rounding up, of the votes that Clinton got. So Clinton got 4% more of the total votes. But Trump became the president because he received 75% more of the electoral vote. And I don't know about you, but 75% sounds like a lot more than 4%. It doesn't match up to what is actually happening at our ballot boxes. The Electoral College has an inherent imbalance between voters and their real voting power vis-a-vis the electoral votes. It greatly favors less populated states. In 2008, the voting power of a Wyomingite was 318% of the national average. That's over 3 times as much as the power of the average voter. Compare that to the vote of a Texan in the same year, and it's 79% of the average voter. I know that's a few cycles ago, but things haven't changed that much. You will still see these dramatic differences between how much a vote is worth in Wyoming compared to Texas or compared to California. In my state, my vote wasn't worth 100% in 2008. Well, I didn't vote in 2008. I was not old enough yet, sadly. You can go ahead and do the math yourself with this year's numbers when they're actually finalized. And these are even based on the total amount of population, not even just based on the people who actually went out and voted. I sometimes wonder how many people realize this imbalance. I think many people already know that there's something a little unfair about how many electoral votes go out compared to the national popular vote, or compared to how much a state actually votes versus, how many electoral votes it gets. And people my age have witnessed now 2 elections where the popular vote didn't match up with the winner of the election. And I'm not really sure if a lot of people agree with that, but I don't think people realize the extent of this imbalance. Shouldn't we want everyone's votes to matter equally? Let's keep working forward here. Once the dust of a presidential election settles and the electors are chosen, they have to meet on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, which is December 14th this year, and they have to do it in person despite the fact that COVID is a thing this year, and despite the fact that one of the electors in my state is 96 years old, because the law says so. This is what the law says. And then their votes are sealed up and they're taken to a joint session of Congress in January, where the vice president, this year Mike Pence, ceremoniously opens the ballots, and then they all count them together, and they finally announce who will become the president of the United States and free us from this dystopian hell world that's been wrought upon us for the last 4 years. I'm just kidding. Nothing substantial will actually change. But does it sound overly complicated? Archaic? Does it sound like this is a bizarre system that people came up with before there were telephones or the internet or even like something faster than a horse? You'd be right. This is a system developed in the 1700s during the Constitutional Convention in 1787. And things pretty much had to be overly complicated like this because they didn't have the technology to help them, and because Ben Franklin was busy smoking weed instead of developing and perfecting his cross-country system of pneumatic ballot sending tubes. And because of slavery. Gosh, it seems like everything in this country has to do with slavery, and that might be because of the fact that if we even just counted the years after the Declaration of Independence, slavery is 36% of our history. That's a lot. And a lot of our Constitution was, sadly, created in order to allow slave states to feel more powerful and secure in our fledgling nation. All of the stuff that I've stated before this is factual, and so is this, but this is a point in the video where some history whitewashers out there will want to deny slavery's role in the Electoral College. If you're one of those people, go ahead and write a comment, and I will never ever read it, but you will feel a moment of catharsis. So I'm going to start here with the 3/5 compromise and its impact on how states were apportioned power. The 3/5 compromise, if you don't know, was a compromise between northern states and slave states. And no, I'm not calling the northern states free states, because they were not free. But let's move on. So the 3/5 compromise was agreed between the northern and the slave states over how they would or would not be allowed to count slaves when it came to determining the amount of representatives in Congress and some tax stuff. Slave states obviously wanted to count their slaves as people, but still treat them like property, because it would mean more power for their states. And according to the 1790 census, 35% of the population of Georgia, for example, were slaves. And that's a lot of people that they could count. Northern states didn't want that to happen because they wanted more power too. And this meant that there would be a deadlock in the Constitutional Convention if they couldn't come to terms. And this new nation really needed to stick together right after, the end of the Revolutionary War. So both sides ended up coming to the agreement that slave states could count their slaves as 3/5 of a free person. Woo! Let freedom ring! Yeah, America! 3/5 of a person. And this is where historical whitewashers like the Heritage Foundation will pop up and say, hey, that doesn't matter anymore because there aren't any more slaves. And plus, the way that we count our electoral votes is based on the bicameral system of Congress, which was a fight between larger states and smaller states. And you're not wrong, but you're also not right. Why do you think southern states, which had about an equal population compared to northern states, would want to have an electoral college instead of a popular vote? Well, the Three-Fifths Compromise already happened when they were discussing how we would elect our president. And this already secured the power of slave states in the House of Representatives. But about 1/3, like I mentioned before, the population of these slave states were slaves. So that means 1/3 of the population obviously wouldn't be voting. So the actual voting power of slave states was greatly diminished. And the slave states didn't want the North to have more power because they didn't want Northerners taking away their right or ability to buy, sell, and own other human beings. And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe the man credited for authoring the Constitution, James Madison. During the Constitutional Convention in 1789, James Madison was quoted saying, "There is one difficulty, however, of a serious nature attending to an immediate choice by the people. The right of suffrage was much more diffusive in the northern than the southern states, and the latter could have no influence in the election on the score of the Negroes. The substitution of electors obviated this difficulty and seemed on the whole to be liable to fewest objections." So what that means is, instead of duking it out and making all the slave states upset again, they compromised yet again and went for an electoral college instead of a direct vote. Let freedom ring, baby. So what now? Alright, it's an archaic system, so why do we still use it today? One argument is that the Electoral College keeps less populous states in the conversation about the presidency. And after all, the president is supposed to represent the whole country, not just the bigger states. So let's imagine that there is a candidate who has a running mate from Texas, and the candidate is from California, and they say that they're going to give everyone from these really populous states free food for everyone and for life, and all the other people have to eat Arby's for lunch every day. So let's do some math. Let's say that all 11,317,911 Texan voters, which again is an estimate from 2020, all 17,704,053 Californian voters, they all banded together to vote for this candidate. And let's add some more numbers together. Let's say that all of Floridian voters did this. All 11,067,456 of them, and all 3,372,199 New Yorker voters, and all 6,925,255 Pennsylvanian voters, and all 6,038,850 Illinoisan voters, and then all 5,922,202 Ohioan voters, and then all 4,997,716 Georgian voters, and then, oh gosh, all 5,524,801 North Carolinian voters, and all 5,539,302 Michigander voters, and they were all gonna vote for this candidate. That was a lot of numbers. That ends up being 78,409,745 people. Considering that literally all of the people in Texas, California, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, and North Carolina, and Michigan all voted, all the people who voted in 2020 voted for these Arby-loving candidates. Well, in 2020, there were like 161 million voters, so let's add like 3 million people who just really, really like Arby's and like this candidate's foreign policy or something. And there you have it. 10 states alone deciding the entire presidency of the United States, and the rest of the 40 states are left in the dust. So, alright, I gotta admit, when I was originally adding all these numbers together, I really thought that just totaling all of the votes from Texas and California would give me something close to 50%, because numbers are hard. And when that didn't add up, I thought like maybe I could just choose the top 5 most populous states, and no, I had to go through like all top 10. And then I still had to add 3 million Arby's fans to make this math work. So forgive me if I don't buy the argument that big states would be able to bully smaller states if we didn't have the Electoral College. And while I was going through these states, there's something else that I noticed, and it's that a lot of the states on this list were people, they are states where presidential candidates spend a lot of their time already. Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania. When's the last time you heard about a presidential candidate visiting Wyoming, having a rally there? Why would they go there? They stick to campaigning in more populous states with a lot of electoral votes on the line where they think they could tip over a slim margin and get those tasty, tasty winner-take-all electoral votes. They don't care about big states who they, like California, they know California is going to go Democrat. They don't care about little states like Wyoming because Wyoming only has 3 electoral votes. It doesn't matter. Anyway, another argument that in favor of the Electoral College is that it gives rural people a bigger voice, and I still don't buy that. These high population areas are still the ones that are deciding the actual election. If we really cared about rural votes, we wouldn't have winner-take-all states. And better yet, we'd count the vote of a person in a rural area the same as someone from an urban area, like with a popular vote or something. And the third argument I hear is that an elector will be able to check the passions of the people. So if the majority of voters end up wanting the free food Arby's candidate, the faithless electors could vote for someone who is more fit for the office instead of the raving meathead from becoming president. A faithless elector is an elector who votes against their party's wishes. And that can happen, but here's the thing, it rarely does happen because the two-party system basically ensures that whoever they choose for their electors are going to toe the party line. Remember, they are volunteers and active party members and donors that are becoming electors, not just randomly picked off the street. And 33 states actually have laws prohibiting faithless electors in one way or another. So if the Electoral College was supposed to do anything in that regard, we've already limited that ability. And if the Electoral College was supposed to be the last line against a populist fascist, well, it's just, I have yet to hear an actual convincing argument in favor of the Electoral College. It's rooted in slavery. It was designed back in a time where the very idea of the internet would have made George Washington's head explode, and it unfairly divvies up voting power to smaller states. We could solve some of these problems by getting rid of the winner-take-all system and doing what Maine and Nebraska do, but why at that point? Why? What would the purpose be? So let me just sum up some of these feelings. This is why I don't think an electoral college is good. Number one, a president that doesn't actually have a plurality or a majority causes problems. Look at Presidents George W. Bush and Donald J. Trump. They were super controversial, and those election years were hard, and they involved court cases and a lot of distrust in the system. And if you look at the 3 other presidents who won the presidency but not the popular vote, and that's John Quincy Adams, Rutherford B. Hayes, and Benjamin Harrison, you can see similar controversies and some noodling around with the votes. We could further ensure that the people have a president that they actually like by introducing ranked voting, but that is a conversation for another time. Number 2. The Electoral College gives political parties way more power than they should, and it chokes out any minor parties. The parties are the ones that select the delegates, and they are the ones who select the electors, and this means that they are basically the deciders of who gets to be the president. It's either going to be a Republican or a Democrat. There's no way around that right now. And I checked my Constitution, and I didn't see anything in there about political parties at all. Number 3. The Electoral College has historically favored Republicans because they control the majority of state legislatures, and they have been engaging in a campaign of gerrymandering and voter suppression for decades. This isn't good no matter what party does it. I wouldn't think it was good if the Democrats did it either. And switching to from an electoral college to a national popular vote would actually help mitigate that damage that's already been done. Number 4, the Electoral College leads to distrust in the system. This is why we had those hearings in the Lansing State Capitol. It's because we have this nebulous system where parties control things and we don't really know what's going on. But Joe Biden won millions of more votes than Donald Trump did this year. If we look at the national popular vote, the winner is clear, and we wouldn't have to be going through this. I mean, we'd probably still have court cases, but also we wouldn't have had Donald Trump as a president in 2016 in the first place. Number 5, the Electoral College opens up some states to faithless electors who can go against the will of the people. And some people think that this is actually a good thing, but I disagree. I think that anytime you put a bunch of power into the hands of only 538 people, that's what will lead us down the road to fascism, not using the will of the people necessarily. And plus, faithless electors aren't allowed in most states, like I said before. Number 6, I believe in the democratic principle of one person, one vote, and I don't think that that's controversial. I think that my voice matters just as much as my neighbor's does, and my vote matters just as much as someone in Texas or someone in Wyoming. We purport to be, a free country, a nation of equals, and yet every 4 years we admit that that is not true. Number 7, the Electoral College creates a false separation between voting blocks in different states instead of building up coalitions. I don't really think that there's that much of a difference between what I believe as a Michigan voter compared to what someone in West Virginia believes. Like, when it comes to coal or something like that, like, sure, West Virginian is probably more invested in wanting to keep coal jobs, but I bet that there are plenty of West Virginians out there who are environmentalists, and if I could build a coalition of voters just voting on environmentalism instead of thinking like, oh, those votes are wasted because all of the West Virginians are going to vote for the coal candidate instead. Like, why can't we do that? The national popular vote would allow us to do that instead of having this false fight between states. So let's go back to what we learned in elementary school. Number 8, I hate Ohio, and I'm tired of hearing about them being a swing state. And number 9, we could have avoided this.
They didn't bother to interview a single witness. Just like you, they don't want to know the truth.
On the first Tuesday of November, everyone casts a ballot, and whoever gets the most votes becomes president. And everyone's vote counts and matters equally. We learned that. Although the voting day is the first Tuesday of November, the presidential election doesn't actually happen until December 14th, and they are counted then by Congress in January. We also learned that only electors cast a ballot for the president, and they are decided by a plurality of voters per state. We learned that the person who gets the most electoral votes becomes president, and the popular vote doesn't necessarily have any bearing on this. And we also learned that the votes of people in less populous states count more, sometimes 300% more than the votes of people in in more populous states. So what can we do about it? Maybe I've changed your mind about the Electoral College, or maybe I've just made you realize how important it is and how ridiculous the current system we have and how much we need to change it. Or maybe you agreed with me all along. But if you still disagree with me and you actually watched all of this and you still want to keep the Electoral College, I'm genuinely interested in why. I would love to talk to you and have an actual conversation because I want to understand. I don't get it. But I hope that at least throughout this video you learned about why I feel the way that I do and, that you can understand the way I feel. And you can stop the video now because from here on out I'm just going to be talking to the people that agree with me. So let's put on our praxis hats. Changing the electoral system of the United States would require a change to the U.S. Constitution, and because of that, things are a little difficult. A constitutional amendment takes 2/3 approval in both houses of Congress, so both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then the amendments have to be ratified by 3/4 of all of the state legislatures, and then it becomes an amendment. There's also this constitutional convention process that can happen according to the Constitution, but hasn't yet. All of the amendments to the Constitution have happened by the 2/3 approval, followed by the 3/4 ratification. There have only been 27 amendments to the Constitution, and that might sound like a lot to you, but the first 10, which we call the Bill of Rights, were all proposed together and ratified together. So proposed during the actual Constitutional Convention and then ratified together 2 years later. The 11th Amendment was ratified 4 years after that. And the most recent amendment, which was ratified in 1992, was originally proposed back in 1787 when the first 10 were, and it just took like 203 years to actually get through. So it's difficult, but it's not impossible. You just can't do it on your own. So I'm going to talk about two paths to amending the Constitution to get a national popular vote. Number one is a traditional constitutional amendment. And when I look at the ways that we can achieve a national popular vote, this one honestly seems so daunting. It requires the goodwill of politicians and cooperation between both the parties, which is real tough and doesn't really happen in a divided Congress like we have. Again, it's not impossible, but it's daunting. And path number two is through ballot initiatives and the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, or NPVIC, is an agreement between Maryland, New Jersey, Illinois, Hawaii, Washington State, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., Vermont, California, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, Colorado, Delaware, New Mexico, and Oregon. And they have agreed to appoint electors based on who won the National Popular Vote once they get a coalition of electoral votes equal to 270. Right now, MPVIC is at 196 electoral votes. So once they get a couple more states to sign on, the compact will be enacted. So how would this work? Well, the Constitution says that states have to send electors, but it doesn't specify how the electors are chosen. You can go back to Article 2 of the Constitution, to that section I read before, to be reminded of that. That's the way that the process happens, is actually left up to the states themselves. So technically each state can change its own laws to modify how they appoint electors. And this is a much easier path to a fairer vote, even if it's not quite a national popular vote yet. In many states, becoming a signatory of the MPVIC would have to be proposed by a state legislator. But for other states, the voters themselves could propose amendments to their state's constitution. Michigan is one of them, as is Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, and South Dakota. So after just getting a few of these states to sign on to the MPVIC, we could get the compact to go into effect. So what is a ballot initiative? It is a law or an amendment proposed by voters themselves, and those states that I listed above will let you do this. It's a form of direct democracy. And typically this requires a certain amount of signatures from registered voters or state citizens. It depends on your state. And then the ballot initiative is put onto the ballot in the next election. And then the voters decide. The voters decide whether or not it actually becomes enacted. And you can start a ballot initiative, you, just as a citizen. It's hard work, and it will take a lot of feet on the ground and probably funding. But just because something is hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. I really encourage you, like today, go look up on Ballotopedia what your state does for its ballot initiatives and see what you can do. You might even be able to find an organization that's already doing this in your area. I really recommend checking out fairvote.org or nationalpopularvote.com for more information where you can find out where you can get help doing this. I think that once enough states actually sign on to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, it's going to push National Popular Vote to the center stage, into the spotlight, into mainstream media. And when people learn how messed up the Electoral College system is, they're going to want to change it. And there will come a point where our representatives can no longer ignore it. And even if there are still electors for a time, at least it will be fairer, and we won't have a president who lost the majority of voters. I think pursuing MPVIC using ballot initiatives is the most viable way to achieve national popular vote, because power structures tend to seek homeostasis. You're probably not going to find a lot of people who, have been in power for a long time who think, yes, we should change the system, because the system has been working for them. But we can pursue different routes at the same time. We don't only have to pursue ballot initiatives. Here's what you can do today to strengthen democracy. Number 1, call your representatives. I know there are leftists out there who are side-eyeing me for working within the system and trying to change the system from within. But like I said before, you gotta work with what you got. And your representatives are supposed to be there to represent you and to represent what you think. So you need to let them know what you think. Your state representatives, like the ones who just represent your state instead of the national level, are going to be the easiest to contact and actually persuade. You're also going to be more likely, in my experience, get an actual response back instead of a cut and paste response. In non-COVID times, your representatives probably hold press conferences and town halls and coffee hours, and if they don't, call them and make them do it. And they probably have office hours where you can go see them in person and they can't ignore you then. Many of them also probably have Zoom town halls going on right now, and again, if they don't, force them to. Become the Karen that you've always wanted to be. Tell them then, when you actually get a hold of them, that you want your state to join the MPVIC, and it's important to let them know why you think so. If you live in one of the states where your vote counts less than 100% of the national average, tell them. They might not even know. It's not like there is a class you have to take in order to become a state representative. They might not even know this. So contact your U.S. representatives too, like the ones at the national level, and tell them the same thing. You support a national popular vote and that you want them to push for a constitutional amendment for it. And tell them to speak up. Tell them to speak up on the national stage and voice their support for it. Ask the candidates in your state before elections to support a popular vote before you will agree to vote for them. These are all good ways to start making a change. And keep badgering them. Badger them forever. Bother them all the time. Call them, email them, fax them, comment on all of their tweets. Really, you have to make it so they can't ignore it anymore. Fairvote.org and nationalpopularvote.com have scripts that you can use if you rely on a script for something like that, and I will put my own script in the resources and the video description too. Number 2, blast out this information on your social media and in your local newspapers. Writing a letter to the editor is a little passé nowadays because not everyone has a subscription to their local paper, but people need to hear about this and hear about how awful the Electoral College is. Like I said, a lot of people probably don't know. Even if they do know, they might not know about the racist history of the Electoral College. I talked to some of my colleagues and let them know that, and they were surprised. And, just knowing about it is half of the battle. They need to know that there is something that they can do about it as well. And that there is something that our government can do about it. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your colleagues, talk to your neighbors. It's a really popular idea to get rid of the Electoral College, so it's not even going to cause a fight. It's great. It's one of the political topics that you won't end in a yelling match over. Number 3, organize a protest at your state capitol. again, this is about getting the word out, and it also shows your state legislators that there are people out there in your state who really care about the national popular vote. And even if it's just you with a sign yelling at the door of your capital, it's still something, and then you can brag about being an activist. Number 4, research ballot initiatives in your state and start one. I cannot stress this enough. It's a tough sell, especially during COVID, and it's going to take a lot of organization. So you'll just have to bite the bullet and join an org, I guess. And I bet you have a local tenants union in your area, or a leftist org, or something you can join in, a Facebook group. Start building coalitions, and if there's not one, start one. Just do it. I know, it's just saying just do it sounds like a lot, and it is, but we need to gather our strength together as the people to push for fairer votes in our country. I probably will do a video on this later about building coalitions and exactly how you can organize, because it is a big ask, but you can also do that research on your own too. As a leftist, I often see a lot of despair and hopelessness and powerlessness online about what we can actually do to change our system. Short of a revolution, like, what are we supposed to do? The system is really, really hard to work in, and political action takes a lot of effort, and it can't just start with one person. But I am hopeful for change. So let's make a national popular vote a goal. Let's make it a goal because it's achievable and it's worth doing. And it's just one step we can take in order to really succeed and make our country a more equitable and more democratic one. Thank you for listening.
Hi again. Thanks for listening and watching. I know that there were a lot of audio problems with this video, so thanks if you didn't give up and kept going. Now that I know kind of how it, like the work that it takes to edit a video and the audio along with the video, I was using a video editing software for the first time ever, essentially. I think the next one will be even better. This was my first ever video, so it would also help me out if you would like the video and subscribe and do all the other things so I can grow my channel, because I'm planning on doing more informative videos, starting with another one next week. You can find all of my contact information on my channel page, as well as the resources in the description of the video.